Welcome to The Perspective with Mike Sherbino. Today on the program, the guys are all together to talk kids coping through COVID. Joining Mike is youth pastor Mitch Hunter and father and youth expert Jeff Watson. Plus, Coach Drew is back in the house to help Mitch, Mike, and Jeff how best to encourage and support the children in our lives, guiding them, teaching them, and leading them through this difficult time for adults, let alone the kids. And now that Health Canada has approved the Pfizer vaccine for children aged 5 to 11, how to explain it all to them in ways they will understand. Let's hear it for the guys.
Hey, welcome to The Perspective. I'm Mike Sherbino, and I'm really glad to have some semi-competent help today. We got Mitch Hunter, and I've got Jeff Watson. And guys, listen, this is serious. Jeff, will you get off the phone? Are you talking to your wife? Listen, you have kids. You're acting like a kid. Mitch, will you stop playing Angry Birds? Like, I'm just so done with that. Okay, we got to do this seriously.
Okay.
We're here.
You're here?
We're here for you, Mike.
Yeah. Ah, man, I don't know what to do with you guys, but regardless of that, Jeff, you got two kids, right?
I do. A 12-year-old and a 10-year-old.
And so dealing with anxiety and the COVID and getting a vaccination, it can have problems. Tell me about yesterday.
Yesterday, believe it or not, my oldest son, got his first vaccine. And I didn't see it coming. It was the day before, beginning at the top of the week. You know, he let us know. He said, "Dad."
So he told
Mom,
you didn't talk about it?
Yeah, he says, "I'm ready." And I'm like, wow, grown
Why
man
did he
here.
want to do it? Why do you want to do it?
His friends. All his friends in his class have had the vaccine already, and it's like, you know, he says, and he feels like he's missing out. He wants to go to see the new movies at the theater. Ghostbusters is coming out. He can't play soccer. He's like, "Dad, I just want to do it. I don't care anymher."
Okay. Mitch, you going to chime in on that? You don't have any kids.
Yeah, Mike, you know what? I'm actually hoping to get married before we even talk about any of that other stuff. That's where I'm at.
Okay, that's where but you got lots of junior high. You're seeing kids all the time and senior high. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, just some of the tension and anxiety. But yeah, we'll give out your email later if you're looking for a wife. So
I'm accepting resumes. That's right.
All right, but you know, helping us so much with the whole subject today, we have Dr. Andrew Blackwood. Coach Drew is going to be with us today, and we're going to be talking about anxiety that parents are dealing with, that children are dealing with over the whole area of vaccination, and especially how do we help our children go the distance to stay strong and stay healthy. I want you to stay with us. Right after the break, we're going to be back with Dr. Andrew Blackwood. I'm delighted today that my good friend Dr. Andrew Blackwood is with us, and we often refer to him as Coach Drew. Drew, good to see you today. You're keeping well?
Good to be here, Mike. Oh, I'm doing well. Fantastic. Great. Fabulous.
You know, listen, every time I know I'm doing something with you, I always try to think, could I wear something just to make myself look a little better than you? But I just keep flunking out on that. You're always looking, you're styling, man. You're styling.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Mike.
That's okay. Hey, but Drew, you know, one of the things that's just all over the news right now is the pressure that parents and young children are dealing with regarding the vaccination. And I got to spend a little bit of time last week with my two granddaughters, and they're 8 and 9. And why are kids stressed out like that? I'm thinking this is not healthy. So I want to ask you right out of the can, what's the best way we can support kids right now as parents are watching and grandparents?
Yeah, that's definitely a concern for many parents. And I know people are on the fence, people have concerns as parents, and those concerns can filter down to their kids, right? They're watching the news, maybe you're hearing things at school. So there are a lot of different perspectives. But the best thing that parents can do has never changed. It's always been the same.
What's that?
I know we want our children to feel better, right? We want to ease their anxiety, but the only way to feel better is to actually think better, right? So
Okay.
how we can help our kids is actually by not trying to fix things, not trying to solve things, but really joining them and getting a sense of what they're feeling and what they're experiencing and what's going through their mind. And we do that through listening with love, listening in a way that invites and promotes sharing. That's the best thing parents can do.
Can you just give me an example of what that would look like? Just take a minute and paint a scenario.
Yeah,
Because you have
for
small
sure.
children yourself.
I do, 8 and 5. So regardless of the topic that we're talking about, our thoughts, right? They inform our emotions. So a simple definition of anxiety is thinking about the future, but imagining something unpleasant happening. So whenever they're feeling anxious, they're imagining something. So it's really just a thought that's causing them to feel a particular emotion. So as opposed to trying to get away from the emotion, escape it, or avoid it, what we want to help our children do is label it, learn to tolerate it enough so that they can think through things in a very, very productive and effective way. So my daughter, talk about it quite often. She was really afraid of bees. So, I was concerned because I didn't want her to miss out on things. So I wanted to help her. So as I listened to her, I started to say, okay, so you look really afraid. What's going on for you? And the more I talked to her about it, the more she was able to open up and share a story about her friend who got stung by a bee in the eye. And she was just afraid because if it could happen to her friend, then it could happen to her. So being able to help her tolerate that and then start to think through, what's the likelihood of this happening, right? And being able to walk her through that, teach her how to breathe and do all these things. But it started with the listening. And let me tell you, Mike, in like a couple weeks, she was out there running. I had to pull her back. It's like, listen, do not approach the bees. Do not attack the bees. But she's like, I want to go out and play. They're in my way, right?
So talking through seems to be a very key thing. I also think that many times as parents, we can pass on our anxiety to some of the children. You work with families, especially around the area of anxiety. What are some of the other stories you've been seeing right now that the kids may not be sharing with their parents or loved ones out of fear?
It also depends on the age, right? A lot of the times our younger children, they don't have the language. However, as we support parents to kind of help them start to feel safe, you find that our kids are often concerned about their safety, but also their parents' safety. Because on another level, if the parents aren't feeling safe and secure, then the children are going to worry about their own safety and security. So by helping children realize that, you know what, I'm okay, I'm going to be okay, God is taking care of us, we're okay. That helps children to really appreciate, okay, we can survive this situation. We are going to be okay. So it's twofold. It's parents really learning how to process that and deal with their own emotions and their own thoughts and their own situations, not just coping, right? We want to be able to effectively bring about change and to address situations with both competence and confidence, right? And then that then translates onto our kids.
I like that. I'm going to invite Mitch Hunter to jump in right now. I know he's got a question for you. So, Mitch, talk to Dr. Drew. Ask him the question.
Yeah, Andrew, I've been listening into this conversation. I say it's all very interesting, and you say for parents, the best way to support their children is listening with love. And I'm a young guy, I've got no kids, and I'm wondering for folks like myself who are part of the community and they know young children and they say, how can I support young children without, overstepping the role of the parents? For folks like myself and teachers and aunts and uncles who don't personally have young kids, but would like to be part of a healthy development of children, how can we help?
You know what? The same thing applies. That's what I love about healing and healthy communication, right? You don't have to be the biological parent or the guardian to be able to be part of that sense of community. One of the things that children and adults too, they require is a sense of belonging, a sense of safety, a sense of strength and power. So we can give that to children simply by engaging with them. Because remember, listening with love is not just passively hearing things. It's really about learning how to communicate in ways that elicits sharing. So talking about the things that you see is going to be helpful. When you see a child, you engage with them. How are you doing? Well, it looks like you're feeling this. Am I getting that right? You know, we start to give them the language and help them to start to feel safe enough to share, because that becomes part of the culture. That becomes part of their world, part of their way of thinking and engaging with their own emotions. When we can tolerate it, then we can be intentional about it. So every chance they have to hear somebody being comfortable with what they're actually feeling, that's going to be a great support and help to them.
Thanks, Andrew.
Andrew, really good words of advice. I'm looking forward to tomorrow as we're going to be talking about the older segment as we talk about teenagers. If people want to receive help or be a part of your coaching expertise and that growing world that many people are buying into, they can go to coachdrew.ca. And we'll look forward to having you back tomorrow. Right after the break, folks, I might be shiny, but I'm not new to raising little kids. My wife and I, we have 5 daughters of our own, 3 grandchildren. Stay with us, and in the next 5-6 minutes, I'm going to unpack God's Word and just share some of the principles that have helped us in this journey called parenting. Hey, when we think about raising children, all sorts of thoughts can go through our mind. And I can vaguely remember to the time when I didn't have children that I knew so much about how people needed to actually raise their kids, what they needed to do. You know, it starts as a dream. There's doting, expectant fathers and their pregnant wives. They dream about that sweet little infant, all cozy in the pink blanket, and they carry it home, and that child is always going to go to sleep exactly when they want it. It's going to smile at the time when they want it. But then suddenly they discover that the dream wakes up in the middle of the night. The dream can smell. The dream has a reversible stomach, and all at 3 o'clock in the morning. We say, what can we do? What can we do? And one of the tragedies is that it's almost funny to think about a grown man, 200 pounds, and a 10-pound little baby is putting him into cartwheels, mental cartwheels. How do I cope? What do I do? And there were many times when I would be holding our little baby and I would give her back to the mother and say, Terry, you need to do something with this. You know, if the problem with children is that we can't send them back to the manufacturer. We got to hold on to them. We got to keep them. And what do? How do we lay out a plan? What is the strategy for moving forward? There's a verse of scripture that many people know, whether they've grown up in the church or not. It's found in the book of Proverbs, written by Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived. And so if that is true, and I believe it is, we should listen. He says this, train up a child in the way he should go. And when he is old, he will not turn from it. Now, is this just a proverb or is it a promise from God? I think what we discover is that it's a principle where God invites you and I as parents to enter into a covenant with him, to say, I am going to do all that I can to raise this child with values, to instill within them hope, to instill within them a way of thinking, to teach them principles that they can live by. And so as we ponder what Solomon was writing when he says, train up your child, the term actually has two meanings. Now, the first thought is what you do with a wild horse, breaking and bringing a wild horse into submission. Well, smile as we want, but we know that there are some children that are really headstrong. Having 5 children of our own, I've discovered that every one of them has a different temperament. And even though they're all adults now, I'm not going to say on national TV which one was more headstrong than the other. Although the 5 of them would take a vote and they'd all know who it is. They'd know who was number 2 as well. But as we think about the headstrong child, what do you do? And Solomon uses this principle of how the bridle, you put a bridle in a horse's mouth to teach it and to direct it, to steer it. And as we begin to think about that, sometimes we have to take stronger measures than others, depending on the bent of your child. What often happens is that we want to react, and we can blow up in frustration. Think of a time I was sitting at the swimming pool, and our kids were in swimming, and there was a lady there whose son was in swimming. And she said, it's time to come, and he wouldn't come. She said, it's time to come, and she starts yelling, and everybody in the pool can hear her yelling. And I'm thinking, how obnoxious, lady, can you be? And she finally says, if you don't come, you're going to be grounded for life. And I'm thinking, really? What she needed to do was to get up out of her chair, to reach down firmly that child with her hand and bring him out and take him home. You know, there are so many different thoughts on what discipline looks like. What I can say this is that there are many times when we need to let our children know clearly, without physical harm, that their behavior is inappropriate. Whether it's a timeout or taking away something from them that might be meaningful to them, and sitting down, as Drew often said in the interview today, and having a dialogue with our children. People, we need to be intentional in how we talk to our children. So Solomon says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old or she is old, he will not depart from it. Now, the nicer picture that is here is of a mother who teaches her baby to develop a thirst. It's like a newborn baby who is learning to feed from the mother's breast. And how do you do that? You have to encourage, and sometimes it takes a few days before a mother is able to feed her child. But when that happens, there is incredible comfort. The child knows where to turn to. And I smile as you might, you know, there'd be many times our children would start to act up and be fussy, and they'd look to me to feed them and thinking, hey, you know, folks, I'm not the mom, I can't do that. And I would hand them back to their mother and say, please take over. And suddenly when the child would be drawn to the mother and to the mother's breast, there was incredible comfort. Now, why does Solomon give us this picture? Because he's speaking about parenting in the context of developing a nurturing relationship. So if I do not take time to nurture that relationship when my children are small, as both husband and wife need to do, it's going to be even harder when they become a teenager. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. What do we do when your teenager acts out, when there's screaming and yelling? Folks, it starts right now. It starts right now. And I want to invite our illustrious panel today, Mitch Hunter and Jeff Watson, to join in, because I know they bring a lot of perspectives that we need to hear from today. So Jeff, I want you to join me. And you're a father, you got 2 kids, and they're not kids anymore, they're getting to become bigger guys. But you've also been a youth specialty worker as well. You've seen, you've heard most of the stories. As I'm talking today, what stood out in your mind?
Yeah, I think the one thing that stands out for me is the whole idea that, you know, if you teach kids, if you give kids the right tools to make their own decisions, they'll remember those. So it's almost like empowering them with good information, with good, you know, we always say natural, almost like giving them what you know consequences might look like, or natural consequences, showing them that, hey, if this happens, I can, from experience, I know this. You know, and that's one of the ways that I feel is
Okay.
a good way to teach kids, just to, from experience.
So you walk through what the consequences are going to be and say,
Yeah.
hey, you know what, if you go down this path, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, we're not going to be there the whole time. The choice is going to be theirs. If we can equip them with the right knowledge and, from our experience, they're going to hopefully make good choices, opposed to us trying to force them to make good choices. Like, you better do this or else, or if I find out, or...
Now, Mitch, you're working with teenagers and junior high students. What do you notice about behavior patterns? And as we're teaching today, what was standing out in your mind?
Mike, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole thing. I coming out of high school about 5-6 years ago, and I remember there were some folks who responded really well to correction, and they conformed. I shouldn't say conformed, but they agreed with authority figures. They said, you know what, there's something there, and I'm going to respect that and go along with that. There were other young people who had a really hard time with that, and they were insistent, no, I've got to make my own way. So, Mike, I'm still chewing on this whole thing. We've got some kids with this temperament, some kids with this temperament. Mike, I'm just trying to learn as much as I can looking at all these things.
So what do you say to that, Jeff?
Yeah.
Like, how long can you let somebody go along that way? There's a point where the rubber meets the road, right? We get frustrated as parents, say, when are they ever going to grow up? So, Mitch, that would be kind of my feedback. When are those people ever going to grow up? Are they always anti-establishment? And maybe they should be. Maybe they shouldn't be.
Yeah, there's a lot of cultures that would allow kids to just go and make their own mistakes. And I think, in the younger years, I think there's definitely lots of space for, shaping and molding. And while we have them under our roofs, those are the times when we can kind of, there's a little bit more of, being able to put limits and set hard limits so kids don't cross the line. But I think, eventually they're going to have to be on their own. So,
gentlemen, can I ask you a question? You're both fathers. What I'm wondering is, the Lord willing, maybe I'll have a kid in the next however many years, and if God chooses to bless me. So what I'm wondering is...
Right to the perspective right now. I'm interested in dating Mitch. No, sorry.
resumes.
So I'm wondering, in a culture that is increasingly resistant to Christian values, you're both Christian fathers, and we're saying, okay, well, we want to lead kids in the right path. How do we do that in a culture that is increasingly at odds with the Christian faith? How do we lead them in what we understand as the right way?
Man, that's a very good question. You should be standing here.
I don't know the answer.
I'm going to let you go, Jeff. I got a thought, but how do we do it? How do you do it?
Yeah, using Christian values. I think there's a lot of. I always think the Bible is probably the most logical book I've ever seen. Like it's age-old wisdom. So I think there's teaching kids that some of those just basic principles like loving your neighbor, loving one another, turning the other cheek, that kind of thing. I think is those are valuable like principles that any person, any child could benefit from.
And if I can build on that, Mitch, one of the things that Terry and I did, and we try to continue to do now that our kids have left home, is we would teach them principles from God's Word. We'd encourage them to read God's Word and to take time to get to know Him. And in the midst of that, we would have conversation. And I would share with them, you can trust the Lord. He will walk with you. I had an interesting conversation last night. We had a Zoom call because none of our kids live in the Ontario area. And with one of my daughters, I was reminding her, I said, remember when we were in this situation and we had nowhere to turn to, but God was faithful. God met us there. And I said to her, you can trust the Lord. God is there. And over, even Moses in the Old Testament, the guy who led the nation of Israel out of Egypt, he said, rehearse with your kids constantly the truths. Remind them of how God has been faithful. And for me, that has been a huge thing. And I really get cranked doing that. Going back and saying, hey, look how God's been faithful. Look what is happening right now. Hey, well, I'm glad you're with us today. It's been a great morning. And we're going to be back in just a moment. We're going to take a break.
just reflecting on the last thought that you shared, Mike, around, when you're speaking to your daughter abroad, just the whole idea of how God shows up in the narrative. When we look at the narrative, that's where we see him show up. Sometimes in our current circumstance, it's hard to see where God's working, but in the narrative, that's where he shows up. And I think that was profound for me.
Very interesting. The narrative is important.
So important to look at the narrative.
Mitch, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Mike, we're saying what's one thing we can do to love our young kids? And I look back, and as I was growing up, every weekend when the boat was out of the water in the winter, my dad, he would take me out of the boat and he'd buy me a hot chocolate and a donut while he was working on the boat. And I look back on that, it was just a hot chocolate and a donut, just about half an hour a weekend. But I say, I know my dad loves me and he's interested in me. And just spending time with your kids, I look back on that, I say, I know my dad cared about me.
That's pretty cool, just hanging out and doing that. I had a different experience because, and I can't go into it now, but it was later in life that my dad really got to hang out with me. He was about 75. I had a little construction company, and he would show up to help me clean up the sites. And he would go and get the coffee and the donuts. And those were moments that I cherish, that I appreciate so much. And today, as we conclude the program, we want to share something with you from our youngest ones to now our elders. We're going to leave you today with some women who have made an incredible difference. Women who have dedicated many years of their lives to keeping other people warm. See you tomorrow. You can find out more at our website, theperspective.tv. Thanks for watching. I'm Mike Sherbino. Stay classy, Canada.
It's all about making a difference, doing what you can with what you have. Who would think about taking old bed sheets or cotton and polyester products, things from thrift stores, to turn them into a beautiful gift? The quilters at North End Church do exactly that. For over 20 years, 7 to 9 women have gathered weekly, even through the summer months, to create these beautiful gifts. Who are they given to? Well, the MCC office takes them, and then they're sent to a place in Kitchener. These gifts of love are sent all over the world by the Mennonite Central Committee, helping people in need, providing comfort. Maybe it's to someone who lost everything and no longer has anything to provide warmth. Earlier this year, 30 quilts were sent to an Indigenous community near Parry Sound, just to let them know how much they are loved. And they need to hear that from us because they experience so much pain. But these women come and give of their time and energy. They pray over the quilts as they make them, thinking of the various places they will go and the lives that will be touched. They enjoy being part of this group. They enjoy the fellowship. And even though no one hardly even knows they exist, their difference is being felt throughout the world. And we are thankful for them. We tip our hat to those unsung heroes who are making a difference on behalf of us all.